Welcome, everyone, to the third and last webinar on state efforts to count all kids in the 2020 census. Please mute your phones using *6 so that we won't have background noise. My name is Debbie Stein. I run the Partnership for America's Children. This webinar is being offered jointly by the Partnership, by the Annie Casey Foundation, which runs the Kids Count Project, and by Count All Kids, which is a group project designed specifically to help count all kids in the 2020 census. I'm really glad you could join us today. There are 2 earlier webinars. I will circulate the recording and slides from this webinar, and while I'm at it, I'll also include the recording and slides from the other 2. We have 5 speakers today. We have Rhonda Mann from Alabama, Peter Chen from New Jersey. We have Heather Hanna and her colleague, whose name didn't get in there, but it's Rachel Haggard. Sorry about that. Oh, no, it is there. From Mississippi. And Stephanie Geller from Rhode Island and Rebecca Rice from Georgia. Each of them is doing something very different in their efforts to count all kids, and so I'm really glad you could join us. This, I hope, will give you some ideas about work you might want to do in your own states. If you have questions after the webinar, please feel free to send them to me at dstein@foramerica'schildren.org, and I'll get them to the appropriate presenter. And now I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to Rhonda because we have a very packed agenda.
Thanks, Deb. As Alabama was looking to do the work on the census, one of the things that we looked at first was the hard-to-count map that the census had. I'm sure you've seen that for your state, but what you can see in Alabama is that from one side of the state to the other, there's sort of this path right below the center, and that actually is the area that has the highest rates of poverty and the poorest outcomes for children. A few facts about Alabama: 67 counties are in our state, 55 are considered rural, that's 82%. We have a child poverty rate of 26.5%, but for children under 5, it's 31%. In 2010, 78.5% of households responded. As many of you know, the greatest undercount of children were in households that responded, so we feel like we probably fit the mold there for what research is saying. You know, the remaining 21.6% required in-person follow-up, which is much more expensive than other ways of getting the survey answered. About 15% of the population lives in hard-to-count neighborhoods, and about 0.3% live in tracts that didn't receive a census questionnaire at all, not in any form, not mail or anything. We also had 25.7% of households had either no internet access or dial-up only, and unfortunately that rate is about the same. So the issue of taking online census surveys in Alabama in 2020 is going to be about the same. Voices went and met with ADECA last summer, because we had found out that the governor had appointed ADECA, it's the Department of Economic and Community Affairs, to be the lead agency for the census work. And we encouraged them, after being in several meetings where we were hearing people talk about all that they were doing and the money that they were spending on the census, we felt like we were getting further behind. So we had a meeting with Commissioner Boswell and his staff, and we encouraged them to go ahead before Alabama got any further behind, and encouraged the governor to go ahead and appoint the committee. So in August of 2018, the governor released an announcement that ADECA would lead the efforts for the state, and our subcommittees are the 8 that you see here. They've gotten a little bit messed up on slide, of course, but I'll tell you, they're government, education, faith-based groups, community-based groups, economic development / industry, healthcare, rural, and outreach. And so that's the way the state has divided up the work. Voices sits on the community-based group, the outreach group, and our governmental affairs has been asked to sit in on the leadership group as well. That gives us a lot of access to those that are doing the work at the very top. We've also met with the governor's advisor just last week to encourage that the governor would include a request of $5 million to be appropriated for census work during 2019-20. And our session starts next week, and so we don't know what the outcome of that is going to be, but we've not gotten any pushback. Everybody seems to feel like that is a reasonable number, and we certainly took that number from some information we were sent last week where everybody's state had the dollars that it should take for us to do all the different counting, the hard to count, the under count, the regular count, and that said we needed about $8 million. So going in there asking for $5 and saying other groups are going to come in and help support with the rest of the money was a good way to address it. The state doesn't feel like they're carrying the whole burden, and also private industry does not either. So with a small staff like we have, last summer we had a staff of 3. In September we had a new executive director. In December we filled out our staff with interns, fellows, and the rest of our regular staff. So now we're a staff of 8. But at the time, trying to think about how are we going to do this work, we initially thought regional meetings might be the way to go and quickly realized that was just not going to get it. We really need to saturate the state. So we thought about who's in place in every county, and our go-to group is the Alabama Children's Policy Council. Sorry about that. And so as you can see up here, you see people that are listed at the county level. A person representing or serving in this position serves on the Children's Policy Council. So I feel like we're in a really unique position that we have these councils already in place. They are mandated by state law. They have to have one, and the juvenile judge serves as the head of the Children's Policy Council in all 67 counties. Unfortunately, we only have about 63 counties that are really active right now, but we will work with what we've got. And so you can see we have access to a lot of people at the county level. We felt like the best course of action for us was to partner with children's policy groups, but we would need to go in and just give them a brief presentation about what the census is, what it means to them. So with some county-specific data provided by the Census Bureau, just online, we pulled that off manually, and we are in the process of creating these fact cards for each county. And what it shows them is the dollars that they received last time the census was taken over the 10-year period and how many dollars they left on the table. As a state, that comes to somewhere between $1.5 and $2 billion for each of the last 10 years. And if you want to know how to get your lawmakers' attention, that is it. We shared that data with with our lawmakers in December at an orientation, and the lieutenant governor quickly came up and said, "What do you need me to do? I'm all on board. Just tell me what you need me to do." So it's a great way to get people's attention. And you know, some of the information coming from the focus groups the census has done says the best way to engage people is to show them what it means to them within their community. So dollars coming into their community certainly rings home and rings true. So what we've done, we hired a research and outreach fellow. And so our outreach fellow is tasked with going into all of these 63 counties and conducting presentations. And so right now he has about 38 that he's either done or is scheduled to do by the end of March. That was kind of our target, to try to get all 63 scheduled. And we want to have those first meetings wrapped up by June the 19th. And then we want to come back in. When we go present, we are asking them to partner with us, handle the logistics at their level. They know where the facilities are. They know about how many people might come out, but we're also trying to help connect them through all of the subcommittees. So it's not just one person or one group trying to do this meeting, but it's a community-wide effort from all of the people that are represented on the CPCs and the subcommittees that are put in place at the state level. So our second round of meetings will involve us going in and facilitating a discussion. It'll be a community cafe type meeting, and it'll be things like, you know, what kind of resources do you have in place? What are you missing? what percentage of the population doesn't have access to online or internet, and how would you handle that within your resources or within your community? How could you handle connecting these people? There's a lot of different questions. We're still working on those, and we have not started that second round of meetings yet. But we feel like by letting them come up with the discussion, the answers, and participate in the discussion, they will take more ownership of it. We can't go in and tell them what to do. That's just not going to work. Another important part of the work is identifying the right messages and the right messengers in each county. It's not enough for Alabama to have the right message for our Black African American community, because families living in the Black Belt, which are more people of color than white people, the message for them is going to be different than the message to other parts of the state that have high concentrations of people of color. After we have our meeting with them, it's not enough just to have one and done and walk away and say, okay, we did it. We're going to provide ongoing support and materials, throughout Census Day. So that would be into June, July 2020. As I said, identifying the right message and the right messengers in each county. Our state has contracted with a public relations firm in Birmingham, Mark Steen, and we've been in close contact with them, sharing information that we've gotten from the census. And she's been working on meeting with the groups and trying to identify the right messages as well as the right messengers, and also modes of messaging. And we got pretty creative, talking about putting this message on grocery bags or restaurant to-go bags, or, if people have music, that gets recorded into that, get it out to the schools, to their websites and their telephone trees. And there were just a lot of different ways that we came up with. And so we haven't seen the message tool yet, but there is one in the works. We also have talked about train the trainer type webinars. As I said, we have a staff of 8, but not everybody can be out of the office at the same time doing this work, and not everybody is prepared to do this work. So we do recognize that we've got some partner organizations around the state that already have people in place, and we want to utilize them and help pass dollars to them if we can utilize the people that they already have in place. They're the ones that are going to know the people. They're going to know where things are going on. They're more entrenched in that area, and that's really important, we feel like, as well. Some other ideas that we have for making sure that we are getting as many people contacted as we can. And we want to engage all of our advocates to participate through sharing our social media posts. We're going to come up with a messaging campaign, either from what Mark Steen shares with us or something of our own. Engaging lawmakers by providing data specific to the counties they serve. Use events throughout the state to raise understanding and awareness. And some of those events are specifically parents of young children. So we have about eight Baby Palooza events that are going on in our state, and we hope to be at all 8 of those. And then looking for other community-wide events where we can hand out information and talk to people, not just about the census, but also about voices and our role, in the census and in child well-being. And so also looking at other meetings and events to push out that information. Again, a lot of that is going to be county-specific. We're still finishing up those pieces, so I don't have them to share right now. But if you have an interest, I would be happy to share that at another time. There's my email address and my phone number. So thank you for letting me share.
Thanks, Rhonda. This is Peter Chen from Advocates for Children of New Jersey. Oh, I got to go to the next slide here. Okay. Hello. Advocates for Children of New Jersey has been doing some work on census outreach for a few reasons. This is just background at ACNJ. We're the largest multi-issue child advocacy nonprofit in New Jersey. And so the focus for the census for us is about a few things. One is about diversity, the diversity of our state. We're one of the most diverse states and as a result, there's going to have to be a lot of differentiation in the kind of census messaging that's out there. Second is data. We're a Kids Count grantee, and obviously we rely on accurate data. The dollars, as Rhonda mentioned, are very persuasive, particularly for a state that's constantly under sort of fiscal pressure. We have an infant toddler campaign right now that's focusing on the well-being of very young children. And then we also we had very few previous efforts on census. So what we wanted to accomplish with this upcoming census is first to establish a statewide complete count committee. Second, to do some state outreach for the young child count and really to raise awareness among our stakeholders. And finally, the engagement of early childhood groups. And so we set about doing that. Our strategy is very similar to prior efforts, which we focused on digestible data, doing outreach to specific elected officials, and then finally partnering with bigger coalitions to try to advance the agenda. The first step is about digestible data. We made fact sheets based on those hard-to-count maps that are available on the CUNY website in collaboration with the funder, the Fund for New Jersey. And we identified municipalities with high hard-to-count population by demographic group, so Black, Latino, Asian, and young children. And then we started doing targeted outreach. Once we identified those legislative districts and congressional districts, I should have mentioned, these fact sheets were made by congressional district and legislative district. So you could see, so when we started doing the next step, which is the targeted outreach, we could hand every congressional representative or state legislator their hard-to-count populations. And we tried to make the conversation focus on the funding in the state budget, but we also wanted to make sure that special challenges for young children were identified, especially that children are often undercounted even when a census form is returned. And finally, we wanted to make a point about redistricting because New Jersey lost a state congressional representative in the last reapportionment, and we wanted to sort of make clear that New Jersey runs the risk of losing out on more representation. So the next step was really to reach out to our partners and coalitions. And we started with our Think Babies campaign. We have an infant toddler initiative focused on a lot of different child care providers, but also healthcare providers and larger state advocacy groups. And then we've built on our existing early childhood coalition. So that's a lot of district preschool, private provider networks, and the education groups. So on January 16th, we held a census event. We had some good press pickup, and we brought in legislative aides, government agencies, and a variety of different professional groups, both at the provider level and at the sort of statewide advocacy group level, and had a little planning session and had different groups write what they might commit to do, whether it's hosting a census kiosk or doing more outreach or being hosting a census event themselves. So here's some coverage of the events. You can look it up later. So what happened? So we do have a complete count commission statewide now. It's up and running. It had its first meeting. It's hopefully having its second one. The second one was snowed out. And there was $500,000 under appropriation for the commission with a goal of more funding in the 2020 fiscal year. We're putting in a budget request for $9 million, and we'll see what happens with that. But we're using the same strategy we discussed before. And we are also taking a local focus on the young child undercount, reaching out to different areas, Patterson, Passaic, Newark, other large municipalities that have high rates of hard-to-count populations. So what's next? We're developing a statewide strategic plan for the young child undercount, and we're presenting to a number of local early childhood groups, and we're advocating for more state dollars. So you know this. Why do you need to act now? Time is ticking, and this year's budget is going to be census year. So, and one thing we have learned is that the commissions are not nimble creatures. These committees often take time to learn about all the stuff surrounding census, and all the recommendations need time. And time is really of the essence, and the time ticking down to census day is really dwindling. So that's the story from New Jersey. Here's my contact information and the contact information of my colleague, Alana Vega, who is we are working on this census project together. So thanks very much.
Thank you, Peter. I'm Heather Hanna at Mississippi State University at Mississippi Kids Count, and I'm joined today by my colleague from the Center for Population Studies at the University of Mississippi. Yeah, I get it on the right slide. Rachel Haggard, and together our teams have come together to form the Mississippi U-Count Collaborative. So we've had two main focuses that I want to share with you today, and those are initially identifying areas where children are most at risk of undercounts, and then targeting our efforts in those areas. So you can see from this map, the census has determined that 27% of Mississippians live in a hard-to-count neighborhood, and you can see where these are, largely in the Delta, dark red areas, but we wanted to go a step further and figure out where would kids be hardest to count. So we know the types of factors that make, thanks to the work of Bill O'Hare and others, that make kids hard to count, and we really have these. They're prevalent in Mississippi. We're a very rural state. Many children of color live in families that rent homes. We have a disproportionate amount of children living in non-traditional household arrangements, about double the percentage of children living with grandparents or in kinship care as the nation as a whole. And we also have a lot of young parents. 33 out of 1,000 births are to a teenager, which is one of the highest rates in the nation. And furthermore, we have a really high percentage of children in poverty at 52%, and also the highest percentage of black children in the country at 42%. So knowing these factors, we wanted to get a handle on where our children would be hardest to count in the state, and we did what we called our down and dirty analysis, which my colleague Rachel is going to tell you a little bit more about. Rachel?
So we use three sources to basically estimate where children in the state of Mississippi will be most likely to be undercounted. So we use the low response score provided by the census, and then we calculated 100 minus the male response rate, which gave us the essential non-response mail-in rate. And then we took the analysis a step further to create a third indicator, which we called the high-risk index. And this basically took the 9 variables displayed and aggregated them. Some of these variables overlap with the low response score, so we acknowledge that they are weighted more heavily. But we know that these variables are historically lead to historically undercounted areas. And so by creating this composite score, we could sum them together and create an index showing where children would be at high risk for being undercounted. And then once we took these 9 variables and created the index, we divided the 3 variables into quintiles and then summed them together to essentially create like a composite score looking at which census tracts would be the most at risk of being undercounted. So this map shows that in the darker red areas, these census tracts, based on the 3 indicators I mentioned previously, those areas are going to be the hardest to count for young children. And so we decided to go into 3 areas, including Tunica, Port Gibson, and Jackson, based on the hard to count status from the analyses. And we held 3 different community-led events where we brought in stakeholders from these areas, including people who work with schools, libraries, as well as politicians and churches, pediatrician's office, etc. And each event in the area had over 30 participants. And we just spent time with them about half a day doing a workshop in this community event, providing feedback both to them and from them on messaging about the census.
And I'll pick it back up. This is Heather. Yeah, we were very pleased with how our community meetings went. It was very humbling. We learned to get feedback on our messaging thus far. We learned you never use the term census tract for the general population. And we also learned some key lessons. They really knew less about the census than we expected, and so now we realize that it's not just about getting people to participate, it's getting people to understand even what the census is all about. And also the importance of local actions and taking action at the local level. And that was an important message as well. So finally, I wanted to show you, this goes back to what Rhonda was saying about the importance of, and I think it speaks to the question that Sarah has put on the table too, about really breaking down what this can mean financially for your area. And so we took the George Washington Institute of Public Policy, their Counting for Dollars document, and also population estimates from the Kids Count Data Center, and we combined those to figure out by census tract how much a given area could stand to lose per year. And what we found, it ranged in our state from about $14,000 all the way up to about $583,000. And this is based on, they used 2015 budget figures. So this, of course, would be a very conservative estimate, and this is based on a 5% undercount. So again, that 5% undercount could be an underestimate as well as the using the 2015 budget figures. So basically, I'm sure you did not all memorize Rachel's methodology. So if you do have questions moving forward, you can contact either one of us, and we're happy to answer those. Thanks. And I'm going to turn it over to Stephanie from Rhode Island.
Thanks, Heather and Rachel. This is Stephanie Geller from Rhode Island Kids Count. I'm really happy to participate in this webinar. I'm both hoping to be able to share some information on what we're doing here in Rhode Island and learning a lot from all of you, so hopefully everyone else is as well. I thought I'd focus on some aspects of our work here that might be unique to other areas. For example, Rhode Island's Providence County was the only area where there was an end-to-end test conducted in 2018. So we had a unique opportunity to really look early on at how the Census 2020 methodology was going to work. And there was some advocacy really going on around making that end-to-end test successful that we've been able to use looking forward to 2020. So I'll talk briefly about that, and then I'll talk about some of our work that's been going on since then around preparing for a complete count in 2020. So as I said, and you may already know, unlike prior decennial censuses, this year Providence County, Rhode Island was the only census and the total census end-to-end count community or area. In past decades, the census has done multiple tests in multiple areas, but this time there was just the one in Providence County. It was actually really interesting for me because I happen to live in Providence County, the community that was where it was tested, so I was one of the people who got tested. So that was a unique perspective on the whole situation. And some of the findings that came out of that end-to-end test were that many people, and Latinos in particular, preferred to complete the census by mail or in person and were less likely to be willing to participate online. Not surprisingly to all of us who have been following the discussion about the citizenship question for a long time, many people had already heard about the planned addition of a citizenship question and expressed fear about filling out the survey themselves or believed that people that they knew would be afraid to fill it out. And I should clarify that the end-to-end test did not include this citizenship question, so it wasn't a test of that question, but people were already hearing about it so much in the media that it affected their willingness to fill out the test. There were a lot of people, in fact, I had a lot of really interesting conversations just with friends and neighbors who said that they, in fact, were fearful of participating in the end-to-end test. Even people who might not be the people you would normally think would be worried, but expressed a general distrust of the federal government and fear about how the information would be used. And another finding was really around just the general need for more communications and engagement. About the need to really make sure we have an adequate number of paper copies of the survey because so many people really were unwilling or unable to complete it online, and the need to make sure that we address the language needs of households. Because we were the end-to-end test community, we were working earlier, perhaps than others, on bringing people together around census solutions, and we were fortunate to have a convening that included many state and local partners and national partners, including our capital city of Providence's, the mayor's office. We were a part of the convening, the Library Association, the Office of Library and Information Services, and the Urban League, as well as national partners including the N.E. Casey Foundation, National Urban League, Partnership for America's Children, and the U.S. Census Bureau. And at this convening, we had about 70 or 80 people attending, including groups representing populations at most risk of being undercounted, elected officials like those pictured, which include the top right, the mayor of Providence, the bottom right is our Secretary of State. And I think you can see Debbie in the middle, actually, participating in the event. So we had, and there were also a number of Latino organizations, NAACP, our local urban league, homeless service organizations, and groups that work directly with families with young children. And the idea of the event was really to raise awareness about the census, particularly the potential problem of undercounting particular groups, to work together to think through how we can best reach out to those groups, and to get really political buy-in and public support for having a successful 2020 census count. Partially growing out of that was the Providence Complete Count Committee, which was hosted by the City of Providence Mayor's Office. They held meetings approximately every 2 weeks from Census Day or April 1st throughout the whole summer of 2018 to really ensure that the end-to-end test was as successful as it could be. And topics that were discussed were things like communications, issues specific to getting an accurate count in immigrant households, how to do house or address verification, track survey completion, and do accurate enumeration of individual and group quarters. And there were also a number of complete count committees set up in other communities, in particular Central Falls, which is another high poverty community headed up by a Latino mayor who is very concerned and very focused on making sure that we have an accurate census count here. And he is actually, in fact, the co-chair of our complete count committee that was established just in December. We worked with a number of partners to try to get a resolution through the General Assembly, and it passed through the Senate but not through the House, and then we worked with the Governor's Office, and there was an executive order that came through in December of 2018 establishing a complete count committee. Our Executive Director, Elizabeth Burke Bryant, is the member representing young children, and we have a very wide range of members. The Complete Count Committee is co-chaired, interestingly, by the mayor of Central Falls, who I mentioned earlier, and our director of the Department of Health. And there are people representing state government, local government, hard-to-count populations, the faith community, labor, business, senior citizens, et cetera. Probably looks similar to some of the Complete Count committees in your state. So now we're really working on what can we do next, how can we work towards a successful 2020 count. So we're really working on continued outreach and educational activities, participating in the Census 2020 Coalition. We're working on producing 2 census fact sheets to be released as close as possible to Census Day on April 1st, 2019, or one year before the 2020 census. And we've also been working to make sure that the Census Committee is adequately funded. The governor released her proposed budget for fiscal year 2020, and there is money, not a lot of money, but about $150,000 to staff the State Complete Count Committee. And we continue to work to make sure that there are adequate resources to have a successful count in Rhode Island. And that is what I have to say. I will pass the mic on to Rebecca.
Rebecca, if you need to unmute your phone, use *7.
Can everybody hear me? Well, can you?
Now we can.
Perfect. And I'm not sure if I'm getting the slide over correctly. There we go. Hey, I'm Rebecca Rice. I'm the Georgia Kids Count Manager for Georgia Family Connection Partnership. I've bucketed out our work kind of at the state and local levels because we work at both. So for our, I can do this. There we go. For our state level work, we kind of bucketed it out into, we have a state complete count committee, we held a state summit, state partnerships, and then statewide communications. As far as the state complete count committee, I actually went to my very first state complete count committee this past Friday. The state complete count committee was established in November of 2017 by then Governor Nathan Deal. However, they only held 3 meetings in all of 2018, but that schedule is expected to be accelerated throughout 2019, and we'll go to monthly meetings in 2020. So far, from what I can gather that's happened at the State Complete Count Committee, it's been a lot of collaborative brainstorming, idea and information sharing, and coordination of efforts among multiple partners. And I think we're sort of at the turning point where we're realizing we're going to have to start moving into action very, very quickly. It is now 2019. Census Day is going to be here before we know it. So that's kind of where we are with the State Complete Count Committee. As far as the state summit, so one thing that we found was really useful, and we got lucky, is that a foundation, the Sapelo Foundation here in Georgia, spent some money to pull together 25 different organizations from with both statewide and regional influence to really put together an action plan. And it's a fully realized document with commitments from every single organization for Census 2020 outreach efforts, targeting specific areas and populations. The retreat was 3 long days, and it was facilitated by both Georgia and national census experts. So it was a lot of work, and I know it took a lot of resources to pull it off. But it was really, really helpful to make sure that really we were, all of us with different networks are leveraging them the best way so that we can get the best count. And essentially, we want to make sure that we're amplifying the work of each organization while making sure we're not, duplicating our efforts in one area while completely missing something else. So this summit was really helpful in helping us think through our work, even beyond just the State Complete Count Committee, which, meets quarterly. As far as our state partnerships, we work really closely with a lot of different state organizations. We work closely with our Association County Commissioners of Georgia on a number of different areas. We work with our Georgia Municipal Association, so both of those represent locally elected officials. We partner very frequently with Voices for Georgia's Children as they're in an advocacy group. We're partnering with the Latino Community Fund for Census 2020 outreach, and then we'll also be partnering at state and local levels with our state agencies. We have really strong state-level relationships with DFACS, Department of Education, Department of Early Care and Learning, and some others that I'm hoping we'll be able to really leverage some of those folks. Let's see. As far as statewide communications, both within the state committee and our partners, we're already sharing existing messaging and resources from the Census Bureau and others. I mean, that's really already begun. We're using our statewide network, and I probably should have said this up front, but the Georgia Family Connection Partnership is a state-level organization, but we exist to support what we call a multi-sector collaborative in every single county in the state of Georgia, and we have 159 counties, so that's a lot of collaborative. But so we have, a coordinator and a Georgia Family Connection Collaborative in every single county, and the job of those collaboratives is to conduct annual data reviews of their kids count and locally developed data, and then put together community strategies, partnering with all the various sectors in their communities to implement those strategies. So, so we will be taking advantage of our statewide network to really do some focus groups and message testing, and we hope to get that started really soon. And then we're working with one of our partners, this time specifically Voices for Georgia's Children, and we'll be developing and distributing culturally relevant collateral in multiple languages. Again, we've already started using a lot of the messages and resources that are already available from the Census Bureau and others, but we're going to be developing a few specific pieces for specific populations. We're also exploring hiring a full-time Census 2020 coordinator in conjunction with Voices for Georgia's Children, just because we feel like this is a hugely important piece of work, and it's going to need massive coordination to, again, make sure we're not duplicating some efforts while leaving other stuff out. And so we think that having somebody dedicated to that kind of coordination will be useful. And then as far as our local level work, let's see. So one of the things we've already started is education to Georgia Family Connection County Collaborative. I realize I have a typo. County Complete County committees should be County Complete Count committees. Funding to some of our collaboratives, strategic funding to some of our collaboratives, local and regional convenings with collaboratives and their partners, and then we'll be, in addition to working with state level state agency folks, we'll also be working to leverage the on-the-ground people from our various state agencies. So some of the education to Georgia Family Connection collaboratives, what that looks like so far is that we've been giving regional, they have monthly peer-to-peer meetings in all of their different, in all 12 regions in Georgia. And so we've already started training them on complete count trainings and hard-to-count populations so that they can be the ambassadors in their communities because they live and work in the counties that they serve. And so they tend to be more trusted than somebody from Atlanta coming in and telling them something. We also distributed Census 2020 hiring information throughout our network with the idea that, again, our network is heavily embedded in its local communities, so we're hoping that if we can push some hiring through our network, it'll be more likely that we'll have local people who live in the communities that they're trying to count working for the Census Bureau. And I will say that was so far, that was our most successful email campaign of 2020, so I'm hoping that bodes well. And then we'll expand education and resources outreach throughout to our network through 2019. Let's see. And obviously we've all seen maps like these in our states. This is just one of the maps that we've been using with our folks to educate them on. And luckily, because our folks are required to do an annual data review of their county data, including their kids count indicators, they typically know when I tell them that, young children who live in low-income families are going to be harder to count. They typically know exactly what their rates are and what their numbers look like, so they're able to quickly put two and two together when we show them these areas that are going to be likely hard to count. So as far as county complete count committees, we'll be doing two things. We'll be either requesting that, so one of our partners, as I said, is the Association County Commissioners of Georgia, and so ACCG. And so I know that they are already asking every single one of their county commissioners to make sure to establish a complete count committee in their county. So where that happens, we'll be asking our Family Connection coordinators to coordinate with the complete count committee in their county to make sure that all the voices who need to be on that committee are there. And then in counties where, for whatever reason, the county commissioner does not establish a county complete count committee, we are asking our collaboratives to please work with their partners to establish one. Let's see. As far as local and regional agency staff, we will be asking local and regional agency offices to be 2020 Census ambassadors, especially those who come in regular contact with people and families at a higher risk of not being counted. So those are people like local DFACS workers, local public health office workers, teachers, Head Start facilities, Department of Early Care and Learning, early education facilities, and early care facilities. So we'll be trying to push for all of those folks, local folks on the ground, to get trained in complete count and hard to count information so that they can be ambassadors in their communities. And then we're really just building Census 2020 messaging into any existing networks and opportunities. So, for example, we had all of our folks from Region 10, which is rural Southwest Georgia, up at our office the other day, and they were not there for a Census 2020 training, but I worked my way into the room and gave one anyway, and they ended up being very interested. So we're really trying to take advantage of anything that already exists and really embed Census 2020 into it. And one last thing about funding, we do not know at this point if we're going to have a state budget. We do have some of our partners are doing advocacy for a line item in the budget, but we really don't know. We have received from foundations so far about $145,000 to do outreach. And so that's we're going to be using that pot of money to do some targeted outreach and funding to our collaboratives in areas that we know are going to have some hard to count populations, as well as funding a coordinator position. So I know I talk really fast. And that's all for me, and there's my contact information.
Great, thank you. So we have two questions already, and we will answer them, but I just want to make sure first that everybody knows that if you want to ask a question, you need to type it in the chat box in the bottom left corner, and you can send the question to either all co-presenters or just to Debbie Stein, and then we will get them answered. The first question, I believe, was for Rhonda, although I suspect that some of our other presenters may be able to add on. Rhonda, Sarah Hughes from Colorado is wondering where you get your county-level estimates about the amount of funding each county receives from census-guided programs. She had a request for something similar, and she'd love to be able to find that information, but so far she's only seen it at the state level.
Sure. So it's not just out there where you can just pick it up and take it. You have to go find parts of it. And on the hard-to-count map, they, by county, will tell you what the response rate was for each county. And so we took that. We took the number that between the census and George Washington, they're saying, well, the census said an average of $1,500 per person if it was 2010. And so we used that number to show how many dollars they had left at the table.
Does anyone want to add to that?
Hi, this is Peter. I just wanted to mention that we've been a little bit wary after talking with folks about who've crunched the numbers on these various census formulas, census-based funding formulas, that we have to put a lot of caveats if we say anything at the county or local level, simply because there's a lot that goes into these funding formulas. Like federal highway transportation grants might be disproportionately in certain counties, but that's not necessarily, and that's census related, but it's not, there may be a county that has no federal transportation money, but that doesn't mean that the census isn't important for them. So I think it's a little bit, it is an estimate at best, right? And as long as we show our work, I think that's okay, but we have had conversations with folks who are a little uneasy about going at a sub-state level for any kind of funding-related estimates.
Great. Anyone else want to chime in here?
This is Rebecca Rice again. I was just going to say, because for all the reasons Peter listed, it can be hard to get estimates at the county level or funding solutions, but that per person, the number of dollars you lose or get per person, I mean, and that's again based on the 2010 census, that's been really effective for us, and people tend to be able to wrap their head around the methodology of those estimates better. And we still say that they're estimates, but that tends to, speak to folks as much as county level data for us, at least, that we found.
And I'll just mention this. Our staff met with our census specialists assigned to Alabama on Friday, and they actually asked us for our materials so they can use them when they're going out because they thought that they were right on target. And I agree, Peter, I didn't say that, but yes, we don't say this is an absolute number. We explain it, but it is an estimate of what they might have received had every person been counted in 2010.
This is Heather from Mississippi. Like Rebecca, we've taken a per-person approach with the $2,700 per person that the George Washington group put out. And using the population estimates from the data center, your population counts in each census tract area, and then you can calculate a 5% undercount. And we do I agree, Peter, it needs a lot of caveats and explaining, which we try to do. And that's why I think in our messaging for the general public going forward, we will probably reduce this, concise it into more of an infographic rather than trying to do a map and leave the map for policymakers.
And just for clarification, Sarah, we did have to mouse over the county and then handwrite out or type out the data that was there. There was not a quick way to get to county data.
And if you get in touch with the folks at CUNY, they're pretty helpful as far as giving. They're happy to share all of their data sets. I think they want as much data out there as possible. So if you get in touch with those folks who made the hard to count maps, they're usually happy to share their stuff. That's how we generated our legislative and congressional district sheets.
Oh, great. I appreciate that, Peter, because the census people couldn't tell me because we did ask them if we could get that. But thank you.
Okay. So our second question is from Mary DeMasi in New York. And those of you who've been on other webinars will recall that Mary and her colleague Kate did focus groups in their state with families with young children. Mary says, parents repeatedly tell us they are reluctant to participate in the census, even when they become aware of funding. Any suggestions on how to persuade them? Have any organizations developed specific messages? And I'm going to suggest that, Rhonda, you take a crack at this, and then Hannah from Mississippi, and then we'll see who else might have something to say about it.
Well, I think initially, we recognized that we were not the right messenger to so many people throughout our state. So we are talking to those that actually are living and working among those audiences that are going to be hard to count or undercounted. And so we reached out in the Black Belt. We reached out to the Community Foundation, Black Belt Community Foundation, and they were very happy to partner with us. They appreciated us reaching out, and I'll say that's one of the things that we feel like is a real gift from the work on the census, is an opportunity to engage in work that is so different from what we usually do, to create a relationship that will extend beyond just the census work. So, we're talking with them, asking them, would you help us test messaging? Would you help us identify who are the messengers within your area? And so it may be that we are contracting with the people that work for them to help us with the work. And that's what we were saying, is we're not looking to hire new people. We're looking at what's already there. These are people that have been working with the groups that we're trying to get to. We work with our Hispanic Coalition. We were supposed to have had a meeting with our Porch Creek Indian and had to get that delayed. We have had the meeting with the census. We've done a lot of work with some of the other grassroots organizations throughout our state, and they are very anxious and willing to come in and partner with us. So I think it's that making use of resources and making sure we're not all doing the same thing, that we're coordinating and collaborating and complementing each other's work.
And this is Heather from Mississippi. Like Rhonda, we felt like we probably were not going to be able to just hit the, what's that expression? Hit the nose, hit the, whatever, you know what I'm trying to say. But we essentially came up with 3 different fact sheets targeted to different groups: parents of young children, African American families, and policymakers. And we went into communities and asked for critical feedback on those messages. And we found out, and the way we came up with those messages to start with was that we synthesized what was out there from previous years of census research. And what we realized really quickly is that what we had compiled was way too academic, and we really have to go back to the drawing board. So that was such a helpful exercise for us. And we were engaging with stakeholders who work with families in different parts of the state. So we're in that process now of taking those comments and really revamping those accordingly. Nail on the head. That was my expression. Okay, that's it.
Hi, this is Peter from New Jersey. I just wanted to I think we get tied up on the message a lot, and obviously it's very important what the message is and making sure that it's consistent across different groups, and making sure that it's tailored to particular groups. But I think one of the things that's been clear in the research, and the folks in Rhode Island can probably talk more about this too with the end-to-end test, is that the messenger matters as much, if not more, than the message. And so engaging the groups that already have the trust of their communities is really critical, particularly when we're talking about groups that have distrust of the government or have distrust of this particular administration. And, it's something that's been challenging for us, but I think we've seen in our other work that, we can say the message until we're blue in the face, and a smaller group that they're the local, for the Bangladeshi population in Atlantic City, that little association is that's where everybody goes for all of their information. And if you can get them on board, then if they just say you should sign up for the census and don't even give a reason, people will go do it. So, I mean, I think that's figuring out who those trusted messengers are is really critical, and I think that unfortunately involves a lot of on-the-ground legwork to detective work to figure out who is trusted in the community. Because it may not be the people who you have relationships with. It may not be, for example, elected officials who we might feel like, oh, they're going to be a good messenger, but sometimes not so much.
Heather, I apologize for getting your name wrong. And do Stephanie or trying to think who hasn't answered this question anyway. Does anyone else want to comment on this?
Hi, this is Stephanie. I'll just say something really quick. I know we're getting near the end of our call, but I'm guessing many of you have already seen it, but if you haven't, there's a really nice report that NOAA did that was released in December about the analysis of the end-to-end test and some recommendations that came out of it that you can find. There's a brief media release, an executive summary, and a longer report with some findings and recommendations that may be of interest, and they do get at a lot of things that Peter talked about around trusted messengers, around different kinds of responses by different groups, et cetera. So if you haven't already seen that resource, it's a great resource.
Great, thank you. I will send that out with the slides. So thank you, everyone. I particularly want to thank our speakers for agreeing to speak on this webinar and sharing what they're doing, and I appreciate all the audience who joined us. I will send out the recording and the slides. These webinars, the series of webinars, and many other materials either are currently available or will be shortly on countallkids.org. That's also a great place to sign up for information on new resources as they become available. And I did want to flag for everybody that late spring we're going to have 3 sets of materials being released. One is along the lines of the work that Heather and Rachel are doing in Mississippi, identifying the areas where kids are at risk of being missed. That is a metric that's being developed by Population Research Bureau and Bill O'Hare. Secondly, we'll be releasing message research focused specifically on families with children. And thirdly, we'll be releasing materials to use in outreach to families with children. So do sign up at countallkids.org so that you can get all of those materials when they're available. And in the meantime, thank you very much and have a great day. I'm going to close out our recording now.